Hey, how's it going? All right, we are live now.
It's not. I don't think it's live yet.
It's live on my side.
Not on mine.
Mhm.
Oh, okay, now it is. Good, working.
Slight delay. Uh, so yeah, why don't you get started with your a quick introduction about yourself um, while we're waiting for
Do,
others.
do you hear? Do you hear a lot of noise?
It's not too bad. Not too bad.
Okay, perfect. Um, well, basically, my background is as a filmmaker, writer, director, producer. I started my first company when I was 19, and I basically the biggest project that we made was a feature film, which was my first feature film, science fiction film, about from the Soviet point of view, which has never been told before, with a touch of science fiction. Is about a cosmonaut that gets lost in space, and when he comes back to Earth, he finds nobody. Um, and he starts communicating with his friends through radio messages.
Hi guys, I'm so sorry for the
Hey,
delay.
no worries, no worries.
Literally just parked about 20 seconds ago and I rushed in. Um, but yeah, no, thank you so much for accommodating me and kind of rescheduling this.
No problem.
I really
We're
appreciate
just
it.
getting through an
No
introduction.
problem.
So Nicolas just introduced himself. So can you do a quick intro?
Sorry, do you want me to introduce myself?
Yeah. Quick intro.
I didn't hear that. Sorry, could you say that again?
Yes. A quick intro, if possible.
Intro, perfect. Yeah. So, my background is that I've been in tech for the last decade. I used to work at Groupon, and then I started my first company in 2011. It was called Lootbox, built messaging technology. And about 2.5 years ago, in 2015, I started a new business called Dispatch. And it was one of the first conversational commerce apps in the UK, where you could request products from any store, and we would find, buy, and deliver it within the hour. And it was all through messaging. So almost like a concierge meets on-demand delivery. Um, Exited that business in February, and since February, I've been working on a new company called Robomart, where we're building a fleet of self-driving grocery stores. And so the idea is you tap a button and the store shows up, so you can shop for the freshest produce right at your doorstep. And we're solving the two big problems that we had in my last business. Um, Number one was the fact that nobody ever ordered fruits and vegetables and other perishables just because that they're so visceral. People want to touch, feel, and see them before buying. And the second big issue that we faced was the high cost of having humans pick and deliver. So we're solving both those problems with my new business.
Cool. And maybe a
Give me a
little
second.
introduction about your science fiction interests.
Yeah, I mean, as you can tell, I love, everything science fiction, everything about the future. For a very long time, I tried to look into how to become a futurist. Um, and it's been sort of an area that really fascinates me. And I think I mentioned a few of the kind of real classic sci-fi films and books that I really enjoy. Dune being one of them, 1984, and a few others that explore more on robotics, and specifically what the future robotics holds in terms of how robots and humans are going to coexist. Um, and so that's a really interesting area for me, especially because that's what my career is based in. And so we're building robots, and the idea is that in the next decade I see so much change happening, that I want to take cues, and I want to see how other companies are taking cues from science fiction in what they're doing day to day.
Cool. Well, I guess a quick intro on me. I mean, I'm Min, and I was actually the main person to push this panel for whatever reason. I love science fiction, and I work in venture capital. So I guess we're looking at the near future, and obviously science fiction is kind of looking at the near and very far future potentially. And so I think in this era that we're living in, the future is sometimes very uncertain, right? And becoming increasingly unpredictable with technology, AI, blockchain, self-driving cars, all this kind of stuff, drones, whatever it is. It's hard to conceptualize how we understand the new world that we're starting to enter. And so my intuition was that, hey, okay, maybe science fiction has some insights. Maybe it can teach us how to think or how to feel about that. So just to maybe to start the discussion, what for you guys is science fiction? What is it? Maybe you can start with Nicolas, and now that you're situated in the right spot.
Sorry about that.
Over.
What is science fiction? That's a good question. I like a definition that I was given while I was making my first film, The Cosmonaut. And I heard somebody say that science fiction is not really about science and looking into the future. It's about using the future as an excuse to talk about humans and the human condition. And to me, that's what the good science fiction is. It's just trying to imagine possible futures, but really in depth, just to talk about the human condition and how we relate to each other. I think that would be a good definition.
Good, Ali.
Yeah, it's just really interesting. I echo what Nicolas says. I think science fiction basically are stories about the future, and kind of humanizing them, like Nicolas said, but making them more about the scientific elements and what's practical and realistic. And the more that science fiction moves into an unrealistic or unattainable domain, it becomes more fantasy than science fiction. So for me, what I've always kind of differentiated fantasy from science fiction, and how I've done that is, whether the story is about something that can realistically be part of our future. And if it's very fantastical, then it's fantasy, not science fiction.
I think on that note, that's a good note to segue into the next question, which is, I watched a lecture recently on science fiction, and the lecturer was saying that science fiction is very poor at predicting the future. Basically, and as well as science fiction authors don't understand technology, and so they will make these leaps in their storytelling that just make no sense from, let's say, some of us are in tech, right? And so when we read through, it's like, this just makes no sense technologically, but then they end up at a place that might be interesting. So it's bad at predicting the future. It's not necessarily, even from Nicolas' perspective, not necessarily about the future. So what is it preparing us for, if anything? Or
so
is it
what I would say is that science fiction's role is not to predict the future, but to influence the present. And it's really like that. I mean, it's depending on, and you can look back and see the different waves of science fiction throughout our human history. And the more positive those were, and I'm referring, for example, to the 50s or 60s, where like the true science fiction as we know it today started to really pop up and became popular culture, and we had all these amazing science fiction authors. And back then, science fiction was an ideal. It was like all these people talking about these futuristic houses and societies, and it was more about utopias and dystopias. And look what happened. Like the 60s was one of the most prolific eras in technology, in human history. We were like trying to go to the moon. We were like doing all these incredible things. And I think all of that was influenced by the fact that we were having optimistic science fiction. Then all that turned to shit, and we went into a very dark era, and we're all about dystopias now and Black Mirrors. And the thing is, we are now starting to so everything that we predicted on the 50s and 60s on that science fiction is starting to happen. We're going to have flying cars. We're going to go to Mars very soon. The challenge now is like, how are we going to start predicting what's going to be in 2060 or 2100? And how will that influence the present, the things that we're building now?
That's a great point. I just want to add one thing, to what Nicolas is saying, is that just to your point, Anmin. Sorry, you go by Min or Anmin? What do you prefer?
Min.
You're muted. Min, perfect. So, to your point, I think there has to be a certain level of naivety within science fiction. If science fiction authors knew, they were the top of their field, scientists and PhDs and mathematicians, they wouldn't be as imaginative. And I think I'll give you an example. I think in the 20s or even earlier than that, there was an artist, a science fiction author, and an artist that illustrated a depiction of video calls, like what we're doing right now. And at that time, it was scientifically almost impossible, right, to imagine how that could actually work. You can go back to even Da Vinci's time and even before, where you're imagining helicopters and other flying apparatuses, and the science of the time was telling you that that's not possible, technologically not feasible. But you need that slight bit of naivety to be able to imagine what the future would look like. And I have this discussion with a lot of my friends all the time, and we talk about, what are the craziest ideas that we can think of or even imagine that might seem completely improbable and impossible even. And one of them that keeps coming back is teleportation, right? And if I say it here, even today, people will laugh, right? That if I say very confidently that I think in our lifetime we will see teleportation or a form of it. See, there's a smile on your face. There's so much skepticism, but the reality is, whether it's 3D printing, whether it's molecule displacement, whether it's virtual reality, we don't know. There are different ways that you can teleport yourself in different dimensions and environments. And so you have to have that naivety to be able to imagine what the future is going to look like.
And so to that point, I mean, I wonder what are the warnings, right, that science fiction is telling us in that respect, right? If we have teleportation, or if we have drones, robots that are Terminator and this kind of thing, are these warnings that we should take seriously, or are they things that are kind of frivolous that we should hope for, but not really take too seriously?
So, maybe killer robots and the dystopian view of how AI is going to basically take over. I have a really interesting view on that, right? So my belief is that when the singularity happens, like, humans are going to be wiped out, right? There's no need for us to exist. But that's a very pessimistic view. The more optimistic view, and a lot of other people within tech also share this view, is that we will figure out a way to merge with AI, so that if you think about it, as humans, we have certain capabilities. AI has certain capabilities, but a merged version of AI and human will always be one step ahead of either AI or either humans. And so that combination, that merging of AI and human, would probably, supersede both AI and humans. And so what's going to happen, but that's what a lot of people think is you, with the neural lace, and how people are kind of working on how to upload your brain and computer brain interfaces. There's going to be some form of merging that's going to happen. But yeah, I think we can't be too pessimistic or depressive about the future or about technology. I think we need to take everything kind of positively. Sorry, Nicholas.
I think it's optimistic to think that AIs are going to need us. For sure we will need them, and merging is obviously the best, most reasonable outcome for us. I'm not that sure that they're going to need us, but in any case, I also believe in being naive, optimistically naive, because that's how you can really build possible futures. In the end, technology is neutral. You can use a plane to travel to amazing places, or to drop bombs. It's how you use it. If we allow AIs to learn from us and to learn the wrong way, they're probably going to become way bigger assholes than we are, because they can be 10 times better. So they're going to be 10 times better at being assholes. But at the same time, I feel that if we find a way to link that technology with nature somehow, to create more, like, some kind of organic artificial intelligence, probably the artificial intelligence that will arise from that are going to be artificial intelligence that don't have an agenda. Like, if you look at nature is we could very well be a simulation. And if you look at nature is mathematical in origin, like any coding language, but then it's very entropic. It doesn't make any sense. It doesn't have any agenda at all. It just exists. It expands, it contracts, it just evolves, but there's nothing good or bad inherently in nature. And I believe, like, true, like, powerful AIs are going to be like that. We just need to find a way to make them have that organic component in which, like, good or evil are not a thing, because there is no agenda more than like just exist.
What about something like switching gears away from AI, because that's a huge conversation, which I love. But how about the space travel, which I guess is a major theme in science fiction, from Star Wars to Star Trek, and I guess what we're starting to witness today, with Elon Musk doing his thing and NASA, is maybe we'll enter a new space age, right? In which we're seeing more and more innovation in that space, and we will have to make a lot of different decisions around, let's say, how do we treat asteroids? How do we colonize Mars? How do we treat, life in space even, right? Where you could be, what was that movie with Jennifer Lawrence and Chris Pratt, where they're strangers, right? Strangers, where they have to travel for, let's say, several generations to reach a destination, right? And these kinds of things, in a lot of ways, we've never experienced that before, or at least 0.001% of humans have experienced that. And so how is science fiction kind of shaping the way that we think about this space travel potentiality?
Yeah, if you don't mind me jumping in, Min, you're absolutely on point, right? With space travel, I think we are very ill-equipped. We are unprepared. We have not asked the hard questions. We've not actually, all the work that's going on within space travel is more on the technology side, and how to actually be able to reach another planet, or be able to colonize a planet, or what technologies do we need to start harvesting, or to start creating sustainable resources over there. Very few people, at least to my knowledge, are really looking into the psychological impact of traveling to a different planet. People, your kids maybe being born there, people never having seen Earth, and again, it seems far-fetched, and science fiction makes it seem really far-fetched in the future and something we don't need to worry about. But you're right, it's coming, and it's coming much sooner than we expect. Just like all technologies, they're on an exponential curve, and they happen so much faster than, as humans, we tend to underestimate the change of exponential growth. And so I think there needs to be some serious questions asked about this. There need to be maybe think tanks or groups or communities, psychological human impact of space travel, not just the technological aspects.
I'm gonna go even further, and because I feel we make the same mistake over and over again, which is when we try to forecast the future, we try to look at the future from the present. It's like, how will the future look like in 100 or 200 years? And we try to imagine this world that we know, and then we extrapolate 200 years into the future. But I believe that to truly forecast the future, you need to look at the future from the future. From that perspective, in my opinion, there are certain technologies that are arising today that are way more powerful and way more advanced than, for example, the technologies that are going to take us to space. So if I think about it, I truly believe that in 100 years or 150 years, which is like a good range for when we're going to be establishing colonies in Mars or whatever, I believe that by then we will have figured out how the brain works. We will have downloaded our conscience into a hard drive. We will have mastered how to make that in a very, very small space. So likely ourselves are going to be living in an atom of information that can float adrift in space, and in as many virtual realities as we want to create that are going to be as real as this one that we are living here. So why would we need to just transport all these mass physically to all the planets, which is a tremendous amount of effort, and you really need some engineering there, which I don't think we're going to achieve in 100 years. If you can just, create that space in a virtual space and just live on an atom floating in space. And that to me is the kind of mindset that we need to have. It's like, where should we put our efforts? Let's put them on the things that are likely going to happen in the future, not in the in the next 30 years, in which we're going to for sure arrive to Mars.
No, but adding to that, Nicholas, if we can upload our brains and basically live in a virtual reality, then we don't need to leave this planet.
What are your thoughts on that? That's what I said. That's what I said. It's like we're just going to live in a tiny space. If for whatever reason this planet explodes, it doesn't matter. We'll just gonna be floating on a capsule in space. That's gonna be fine. But yeah, definitely and that's another thing. Another interesting one. I recently finished, now I have a virtual reality company, and I finished a short film that talks about a dystopian future in which we need to leave Earth. And so the AI, which is the protagonist of the film, called Melida, is trying to figure out a way to get humans to a planet that is like Earth, and how to get them there. And I was called out by an amazing futurist, Monica Bielski, and she said, like, all this is fine. I mean, it's lovely science fiction. It's great that you're talking about climate change and like saying, trying to envision how the future will look like. But to be honest, it's fucked up. You should be talking about how to solve this planet. Like, we're not there yet. We should be like, our science fiction should be, how are we going to fix this one that we have in here?
And I guess that's why we have so much dystopian science fiction, right? A lot of writers, they have this vision that we, given the political superstructure, corporations, and all this, human greed, et cetera, and you extrapolate, then everybody kind of thinks, we have a dystopian potentiality. Whereas, there's only a few who have this Star Trek kind of mentality where, okay, humans will achieve warp technology, we will have replicators, we'll have holodecks and drones and robots, and then we'll rise beyond what we, what we're held back from, like our greed and all these things. So I guess in some way it's hard to conceptualize a world in which we solved a lot of these problems and then become a sustainable Earth, right? But at the same time,
I'm going to pull it back to.
Go ahead.
Sorry. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, I was just saying that, picking up on one of your points, right? Most science fiction, at least a lot of science fiction that's based on the future, tends to be dystopian. And I actually spent a very long time looking for utopian science fiction, like Star Trek, like, there are a few others, but it's so far and few between. And I kind of thought a lot about why that is, and why all science fiction, or at least most of it, the majority of it, seems to be dystopian. And I think, it's about conflict resolution. It's about, there needs to be some tension. And that's sort of when you have a utopian society or a utopian view of the future, then, how do you create that conflict and then the resolution from that? So just in storytelling, maybe Nicholas, Min, you guys can comment on that. Nicholas, you are a science fiction kind of, you've done a short film. Yeah, go ahead.
I think the answer to that is simpler. We're basically genetically wired for catastrophe. And this comes from, when we were in the prairies of Africa, and basically we had two states. We either were looking for food, or we were trying or avoiding to be food. And therefore, our whole body is engineered to look for danger. We are called for danger. And that's why when you watch the news, even though there are like the incredible things going on, they only focus on the bad shit. And actually, the numbers demonstrate that we are better now than ever in history. We have less people in a situation of poverty than anywhere in history in absolute numbers, even though we're like 5 billion more people now. There's less wars, less conflicts, less everything. And the thing is, we're engineered to seek for the danger, the bad things, the bad news. And that's the reason that it's easier to write about that, and obviously easier for people to look for that. It's like it attracts us more. It's genetically, and it's something that we should start changing, to be honest.
Yeah, I guess we have to think up the stories that would fit into a world that is more hopeful, right? I think I kind of want to touch back on one of Nicholas's idea about if we could fit our consciousness onto an atom into a virtual world, and because I wonder, when we think about the future, we tend to think of the future in maybe 5 to 10 years. You guys mentioned up to 150 years, but we don't think in terms of our future in terms of millions of years, even billions of years. It's very hard for obviously we're human, we have a hard time going even beyond a day, but in some ways I think we need to be moving our consciousness or our future planning even farther into the future. And so in that context, I wonder if I can fit my consciousness onto an atom, but then the sun explodes, then what? Right? Don't we still need to get far away from the earth?
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that we were talking about is, right, if the sun explodes, and you need to have, you're gonna have data farms, containing all the data that people have uploaded. So that computing power needs to reside somewhere until we figure out a way to not have hardware. But to what you're saying, I think one of my favorite science fiction stories of all time, I think I mentioned to you earlier, was Dune. And Dune is one of the few stories that actually tackles that long-term view. It's a 6-book series, and at one point, around the 3rd book, it jumps 20,000 years in the future. And so, and the entire series is very well written to make people kind of believe in a certain future situation with different alien races coming together and all that. But that one aspect where you jump 20,000 years in the future, because you don't really see it in a lot of science fiction, and I think it's very tough, right? A lot of even in a lot of companies, when they do their 5-year plan, 10-year plan, there's some companies, like Japanese companies, that do 100-year plans or 300-year plans, right? But nobody's really tackled or created a 10,000-year plan for humanity or for the company or for themselves, right? It's just, I think it's too difficult to imagine what that future would look like. And Nicholas was talking about how we need to define what the future is going to look like through future technologies, right? But it's so difficult to pinpoint what the future is going to look like in 10,000 years. I think maybe that's why it's tough to imagine, how we can live in a virtual space. And also, to that point, is like, are we going to ever be immortal? What are you guys' thoughts on that? If we upload our onto a virtual reality, will we be immortal? Do we have a soul? Does it matter?
I have no doubt that we're gonna live forever. We're gonna live forever as long as we want to. That's the good part. We're gonna be able to choose when to disconnect. But I'm pretty sure that in the next 50 years, we're gonna find ways to really extend our organic organisms, and eventually we're gonna just find either enough fixes to keep fixing us, or a way to stop. Basically, dying is a sickness. It's nothing else but a sickness that everybody has, and it'll just at some point will kill you. But yeah, either by downloading our conscious or finding ways to maintain our organic bodies connected to some kind of like other organic compounds that we have created technologically, I'm pretty sure we're gonna live forever.
I think in that context, immortality is always very interesting to me, because it brings up the question for me, like, what does it really mean to be human? And I guess that's the parallel that I think philosophy and science fiction have with each other, which is that is actually asking these big questions in different contexts. So like, okay, if let's say today I get immortality, but in 20 years, am I the same person? In 50 years, am I the same person?
Yeah.
1,000 years, I won't be the same person, right?
Actually, building on that, I think also that we are in a very early stage of conscious and evolution as human beings. Even though we're very evolved, we're still understanding time and space in a linear way, as if they were the only dimensions that we inhabit. And one of the things that I think is going to change in the next decade is that we're going to tap into deeper, more profound dimensions that will probably make the space-time continuum not make so much sense as it does now, which is completely influencing the way they live, the way we live. But we're thinking about forever, when maybe forever won't make sense as a concept in the future, because we're gonna. And I always use the example of psychedelics, which is probably the easier way to conceive these things. No, when you take like deep psychedelics in higher enough doses, you will get dissolved. Your conscience will get dissolved in the space-time continuum. You're not going to have an ego, a person anymore, and time will completely disappear. It will be something that you don't care about anymore. It's just something else, and a lot of all the dimensions. And I'm pretty sure we're going to be able to dive into all of those with or without substances. But in the future, I'm pretty sure our conscious will completely change how we understand our present.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting, when we're talking about immortality and what's forever and timelessness and death. Sorry, death plays a really big part of that, right? So science fiction doesn't really tackle death, at all. And whenever you see death in stories, it's either horror or drama or something else. But what's really interesting to me is science fiction that tackles immortality with a view on death and trying to see whether there can be a way to avoid death, like Nicholas is saying. He's convinced there is. I'm not so convinced there is, but I like any kind of hopeful optimist, I think that there definitely can be a way to extend life, to make it almost immortal. But then it comes into a whole different question about time, and that's a different discussion. But yeah, I think it's really interesting to see maybe in the future science fiction about and immortality.
Well, I think in a lot of ways death is a very good thing, right, for humanity or for evolution. I mean, because we die, we can reset our value system more or less. when our parents, our grandparents, and their great grandparents, when they pass away, their values either die or augment into us, right? And then we have a chance to kind of reset. But what I imagine, like, if we had immortal people, let's say 1% of people are immortal, they could have an outsized impact on values sticking around, right? That maybe we don't necessarily want them to stick around.
Yeah, but wouldn't it make them almost infallible? And why would they even need values? I was an immortal being. I'd be so cocky. I wouldn't even I wouldn't even care about the rest of the world, if you think about it, right? I don't know. It's an interesting point.
Yeah, I think there's definitely something there. I mean, I can imagine that with me, I would be relatively selfish. I mean, assuming that, let's say, I don't have a conscious enlightenment kind of experience along the way, or experiences along the way, I would probably impose my values upon the world, try to save up a lot of money, et cetera, et cetera. But maybe that's me thinking from my dystopian, triggered mindset that Nicholas is speaking about.
Yeah, and just while you were talking, I realized that there is science fiction about kind of immortality and death. Vampires and I mean, it gets a little bit more into the fantastical, but Life of Dorian Gray and other kind of immortal humans. So yeah, interesting.
I'm gonna recommend here one of my favorite science fiction stories of all time. It's called The Egg. I strongly recommend that you guys read it. It's very short, and cutting the story very, very short, it's basically a person who dies and on an accident, and it appears in front of like a person, somebody that is talking to him, and it's like, oh, what happened? And it's like, well, you died. And he starts talking about like why did he die, what's going to happen with his kids, his wife, and the other guy is like, just don't worry, they're going to be fine, they're going to be okay, everything's going to be okay, you just died. And he asked like, so what now? And the other guy says like, well, you're going to come back to Earth and you're going to live another life, because if you're here, it means you still needed to resolve some things, you still needed to learn something, and whenever you have made your learning, you might go to the other place. And at some point it's like, oh, so then if I have came back many times over in different times in history, I probably met myself. I probably met with the version of myself at some point. And then this God tells him, no, you didn't understand. They are all you. All of them. Every person you've met in history, it's all you. It's all different versions of yourself. This is just an egg. And you're there trying to grow, and eventually you'll just, once you've done all your learnings, which is a nice way of looking at immortality. Maybe that's where we are.
I like that. I think I read that story. It's great. I think that's actually a good transition to another question I'm thinking is like, when you guys personally, when you read or when you watch science fiction movies or TV shows or whatever, um, does it change your behavior? Does it change how you think about, like, in actual behavior, not just in your thinking? I mean, obviously, our minds can change a lot of things, but do you guys change how you would do certain things in your lives, or think about how you would change something in your life?
Yeah, you want me to kind of pick that up first? So I think about it all the time. I mean, there's so many science fiction films about the future, especially robots and robotics, that influenced me and influenced my work. You know, you know, a lot of my favorite films have to do with, you know, questions about what it means to be human. You know, when robots gain consciousness, or they or whatever form of consciousness they do gain in the future, what does it mean to be human then? And how will we treat robots? How will they treat us? And you know, all that really plays into what I do. You know, we're building self-driving vehicles, right? This is one form of robotics, but you know, my vision and my kind of career goal is to be in robotics for a very long time. And so, you know, thinking about these questions, I think earlier we talked briefly about it. You know, how do you build empathy, or you know, good or bad within AI and robots? That's a really important question. And you know, one possible answer is that we actually educate robots the same way we do children, robots the same way we do kids. But obviously with certain different, you know, different ideas and different ways to do so. But yeah, just to answer that question, I think, yeah, there's a lot of science fiction. Like you look at Bicentennial Man, you know, I'm not a fan of Robin Williams. You know, you know, he's a great actor, but I'm not a personal fan. But I think that film specifically is one of the best at addressing what it means to be human, you know, in a world full of robots. And there's another anime, I think I mentioned in one of the emails to you, Time of Eve. It's a Japanese anime manga, and the best you know, explorations of what it means to be a robot. In that anime, you know, just very briefly, all robots have a halo around their heads to indicate that they're robotic, because they look so human. Yeah, they're humanoid robots, androids, and they look so human and so lifelike that they have to have a halo to differentiate. And so humans have forced this upon robots. And then there's a cafe where they don't discriminate, and they say that are allowed here, and everyone, humans and robots, will mingle and coexist in this cafe and in this environment. And it's really interesting because you start to see what, you know, the future is going to look like. How are we going to treat robots? Are we going to discriminate against them? Is it right to discriminate against them? Maybe it is right, maybe it's not. But yeah, I think these are two kind of science fiction stories that really influenced my work.
This morning we were having I was moderating a panel on the future of sandbox, and we posed a question which is very interesting, that we didn't dive too deep on it, but like when and if is sandbox gonna admit an AI, and if we're gonna admit it, and if that's so, when is it gonna happen? I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Is Sandbox going to meet AI? Sorry, I didn't hear that clearly.
Admit.
So the question was if Sandbox is ever going to admit an AI.
Admit. Oh, wow. Okay.
And if so, when is that going to happen?
That's a great question.
That's too good. I guess they have to, you know, we have to feel like they can be our friend, right? Or maybe they have to attend. They have to attend a summit.
Yeah, that's the most important thing.
Sure. They have to be under 30.
That was another discussion that we're having this morning. That was fascinating. It's like discussing about all this under 30 kind of ongoing discussion and rules. It's like, what happens when we are so evolved that with 10 years old, we are as smart as we are right now with 30 or 30 something, or, you know, it's like, how is it going to change when we live forever? Are we going to still want to attend a summit when we're like 155? It was a fun discussion.
Well, that's pretty interesting.
Yeah. So what were the kind of key takeaways, like, say, in terms of when's the AI going to join? I'd be keen to know.
So have the people said that they want to meet an AI? Have the people said yes? Um, Sandbox in 2117, so in 100 years. My prediction was that that's going to happen within this decade.
Yeah. Much
Even
sooner than we
yeah,
expect.
even so, it's not like an advanced AI. I'm pretty sure as a community, we have the duty to set a standard and to be inclusive, and that includes AI. So
I guess I would guess that in modern or in the society, we would have to first be outside of sandbox, have to be accepting that AI are sentient, which is I think a very hard problem. I mean, even right now, we barely know what human consciousness means, and I can't. It's far hard for me to conceptualize when we will just be able to say definitively that this thing is sentient, because even right now you have robots and even chatbots that are becoming closer and closer to resemble humans. But that doesn't mean that they're actually sentient. They could just be
I, I
replicating.
wouldn't even.
But then that comes into the discrimination point that I was talking about, is if we never believe that they're sentient or equal to us, then we will always discriminate against AI and robots.
I think that's the paradox.
I wouldn't even say that most of humans are sentient. So definitely an ongoing discussion.
Interesting point.
Oh man, that's good. Well, I guess we can move on to another question. I'm wondering is how do we how do you think science fiction kind of helps to improve the world? Like, I guess this might be a good and as well as like what kind of allegories do we see them? What kind of allegories do we see science fiction kind of providing for our current world to help us understand our current world?
Well, once again, sorry.
And you can use real examples, right, from science fiction.
Yeah, so I think either that be the dystopian science fiction, that be to help us understand what not to do and in which direction not to go, or utopian science fiction to help us understand what's good and how to get there. I feel again that it serves to influence the present in great ways. It's a shame that there is first more black mirrors than white mirrors. I think that we have the duty to create more utopian, not as in utopias, but like it's in positive, optimistic futures. But at the same time, another thing I'm missing is those science fictions that also dig into the how we got there and how to get there. And I remember in one of my favorite science fiction series, Battlestar Galactica, which is again a full excuse to talk about being human, but I think it's one of the best examples on the dynamics of politics and social groups and different things that can happen in the future among robots and when we need to leave Earth. That really shows you the social from within. It's not just the massive buildings and flying cars, but also how do you build a society when we are in the future? How does that work?
Especially with the prequel Capricorn.
Exactly. So I think we need more of that. We need more of like practical science fiction. And it comes to mind when I was researching for my feature film, The Cosmonaut, about space, and I read everything that exists about space. I found out that there is, I don't know when it was created, but probably 50, 60 years ago, when we started going to space, there was created some kind of like league of law in space composed by hundreds or thousands of lawyers that started to legislate about space, which didn't make any fucking sense, because they were saying like, what happens when we land on Mars? Who's gonna own that thing? Who owns a meteorite? What happens if you dig it and get some money from the minerals in it? And it's like it felt so far-fetched, but at the same time it made so much sense to start legislating about these things. And I would, even those were like lawyers trying to actually make laws, to me that's science fiction too. They were just trying to provide for the future, to imagine how it was going to be in 100 years, and then try to build a frame.
Yeah, no, those are great points. And I think, Min, to your questions, like, I think science fiction, what it does really well is it inspires us as thinkers, as engineers, mathematicians, scientists, artists, creative people, authors, everyone. And I think we need science fiction to be able to inspire new generations. And it's great to have, like, I really like what Nicholas is saying about having very practical science fiction, but I also think we do need the more imaginative, fantastical science fiction as well. 20,000 years in the future, what's going to happen, right? And exploring different pathways, not just one particular pathway, but looking at all different potential pathways to get to a possible future. And so I think that's what it does best, is it inspires the next generation to kind of keep working towards a really positive future.
Well, I guess in that light, I mean, I think we're coming close to a close here, but I guess my final question is, what, like, let's say that you guys, each of you guys, were charged to be king of humanity, all of humanity, and it's not just about what is the next 5-year plan or whatever. What kind of goals would you set, let's say, for the next 100 years for humans to work on? What are the big projects that you would want the majority of humanity to put all their effort into?
You want me to take this first? All right.
Yeah.
It's a tough question. I mean, that's a very tough question, right? First off, I really like the idea of being king of all humanity, but I mean, it's a tough challenge, right? It's huge pressure to really think about what you would do as someone in that position. Again, just coming back to my favorite kind of science fiction series, Dune, in that there's a God Emperor of Dune, right? And he sets a future golden path. That's his plan, right? It's a very simple, straightforward plan. And because he's prescient, he can see into the future. And so he can actually see all possible futures. And he builds this golden path based on that knowledge, being a god, being able to see all possible futures. He creates a path in which nobody can ever be like him again. It's interesting. It's a really interesting view on it, right? But it's selfish, and at the same time, it's selfless as well. Because some people argue that he did it for all of humanity, or not even humanity. It was like alien races and everyone. But specifically for us, for the next 100 years, I think people will say climate change, this, that. There are a lot of different issues that we need to resolve. I think there's a really interesting talk that I heard from the creator of string theory. I don't remember his name. He's a professor, and he talked about different levels of civilization, and civilization level 5 is where we've colonized the entire solar system and interplanetary travel and this and that. And then level 4 is one step below, 3, 2. And then somebody asked him while he was talking about this, that what level are we at right now? He said level 0. To get to level 1, we need one form of government across the world. We need to end wars. We need to be able to, administer ourselves in a peaceful manner before we can start really tackling the questions about how to colonize a different planet and how to get there and what to do with climate change. And so that's really interesting. And I don't think we'll ever be able to, get one synonymous government, or maybe, but it's an interesting goal. If I was king of the world, that's what I would do first.
I agree with that. I really like that. To that, I would add mostly non-technological things. I would say our goal for the future to start with should be to understand and proactively use compassion, and also to dissolve the ego as much as possible, which is what drives most of the conflicts. To do that and like understand that love for each other, love for the people you have around, and compassion, it's something that can solve basically any kind of conflict. We have unlimited resources. We have an abundance of resources. The only thing getting in our way for a better world, it's ourselves. It's our fucking egos, our boundaries, our countries, our flags, our all those things that are preventing us, as you said, as thinking as one and understanding that we are all the same. Black, white, tall, short, we're all the same. So I would say, if I were to work on something, it would be that. It would be education, and it would be trying to get there. Because if we solve that, we're going to solve everything else. Everything else is pretty easy. Technology is very easy to get and build with our mental capacities. The difficult thing is the other one. Funny enough.
Well, cool. Thank you guys for the talk. Do you guys have any last thoughts on science fiction? What science fiction tells us about the future? Do you think we've distilled it? I feel like we could talk for hours about all of
I know it's such an interesting topic. I mean, you could talk for hours about this. But yeah, no, I think that it's just exciting to see. One thing I will say, just maybe my final point, is that Hollywood has become so repetitive that it's annoying, right? There's hardly been a really great science fiction film that is original, not a remake, not a rehash, not a sequel, a prequel, or something, right? So I'm waiting for the next really great independent original science fiction film that can really wow me.
Do you guys hear me? Hello?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah, we can hear you. We can hear you.
Okay, sorry, I'm seeing the mute button, but no, I was just going to say that I slightly disagree with that, even though it's true that Hollywood has become pretty boring. I would say that in the past year there has been some pretty awesome, dope science fiction that I have loved, with a lot of debate. But I would say Interstellar is probably my favorite. I think it's a film that gave us something to think about, and I think it was quite original. I
agree. Interstellar is one of the few original ones that have come out in the last few years.
Yeah, but yeah, definitely we need more, and I think we need a second golden era of science fiction. As we were saying, like the 50s and 60s define 3 or 4 decades of innovation and thinking about the future. And I think now that we're approaching the moment in which all of those things are coming true, we need to start thinking about the next 50 to 100 years, and it's about time to start building positive narratives of the future.
I think that's a good note to end on, guys. Thank you. So hopefully we'll meet again soon and talk in person about science fiction. So see you guys later.
Perfect. No, thank you so much, guys, and appreciate you accommodating the time shift. You have a great day, and hopefully we meet soon. Take care, guys.
Absolutely. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.